My name is Fiona Calloway and I'm 35 years old. Minutes right after my divorce was finalized, I called my dad, fire all 27 employees my in-laws planted in the company. I said it standing on the courthouse steps, still holding the manila envelope with the judge's signature barely dry on the final decree, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone twice before he picked up. My father, Harold Calloway, built Callaway's steel fabrication from a single rented warehouse in 1987 into one of the largest structural steel suppliers in the region. He handed me 25% ownership on my 30th birthday, telling me it was mine to grow into, mine to protect. I married Reginald Voss 8 years ago, and from the very first family dinner, his mother, Delphine Voss, made it clear she saw my father's company not as something I had earned, but as a resource waiting to be redirected. She never said it outright. Instead, she said things like, family should look out for family, and Reginald's cousins are so talented, it would be a shame not to use them. Over the years, one by one, Voss relatives and Delphine's hand-picked associates filled positions across payroll, logistics, procurement, and even our internal audit department. My father, trusting me completely and trusting that my marriage meant our two families were now one, approved every hire I recommended, never questioning why so many of them shared a surname with my husband. It took me 6 years to understand what I was looking at. It started small. A missing shipment invoice here, a vendor contract that quietly changed hands to a company registered under Delphine's maiden name there. Then larger. Steel orders that should have gone through 3 layers of approval, sailing through with a single signature from Reginald's cousin Desmond, who ran procurement. A logistics manager named Preston, another Voss relation, rerouting shipments to a secondary warehouse that, on paper, didn't officially exist within our company structure. I brought concerns to Reginald once, gently, over dinner, and he laughed it off, told me I was being paranoid, that I saw conspiracies where there was only family helping family. When I raised it again months later, he grew cold, distant, told me I sounded ungrateful for everything his mother had done to help our business thrive. I hired a forensic accountant privately, paid her in cash, met her twice a week in a coffee shop 40 minutes from home so no one would recognize us together. What she found took 11 months to fully untangle. 27 employees, all connected through blood or marriage to Delphine Voss, embedded across every critical department of my father's company. Combined, they had siphoned off nearly $4 million over 6 years through inflated invoices, phantom consulting fees, and a shell logistics company that billed us for warehouse space that was, in reality, an empty lot behind a strip mall Delphine owned. I didn't confront Reginald with the numbers. I filed for divorce instead, quietly, citing irreconcilable differences, and I let the accountant's report sit sealed in a drawer until the ink on my decree was final. Some people would call that cowardly. I call it patient. Because the moment I was free, legally and completely free of any tie that made Reginald's family feel entitled to protection, I could finally act without a single ounce of guilt or hesitation holding me back. Standing on those courthouse steps in my gray blazer, the one I'd worn specifically because it made me feel like the CO I was supposed to be all along, I called my father and told him everything, all 6 years of it, condensed into 4 urgent minutes. I told him about the shell company, the phantom invoices, the warehouse that didn't exist. I told him to fire all 27 employees my in-laws had planted in the company, effective immediately, security escorting each one out before the workday ended. My father, silent for a long moment on the other end of the line, finally said only one thing: send me the report. Within 20 minutes, our head of HR had a list. Within 2 hours, the terminations began. Thank God I did, because that same evening, while I was still unpacking boxes in the small rental house I'd moved into during the separation, my mother-in-law showed up at my door. Delphine Voss, a woman who had never once raised her voice in 8 years of forced pleasantries at holiday dinners, was pounding on my door hard enough that my neighbor's porch light flicked on. When I opened it, she was already yelling before I could say a word, her face red, her voice cracking with a fury I had never seen from her, demanding me to reverse every single termination immediately, or she promised, in front of God and my new neighbors, that I would regret ever being born into a family that dared to touch what she considered rightfully hers. I stood in my doorway in the fading evening light, watching Delphine Voss shake with a rage I had spent 8 years carefully avoiding, and for the first time in our entire relationship, I felt nothing but calm. You need to leave my property, I told her, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, and told me I had no idea what I had just done, that Reginald's family had built half of what my father called his company, that those 27 people had families of their own depending on those paychecks, families I was now, in her words, starving out of spite. I told her the only thing anyone had been starving was my father's business, slowly, deliberately, for 6 years, and that the forensic report sitting in my lawyer's office proved every dollar of it. Her face changed then, just slightly, a flicker of something under the fury, and I knew in that instant she understood I wasn't bluffing. She tried a different approach after that, softening her tone the way she always did when yelling failed, telling me that Reginald still loved me, that this could all be undone if I would just reconsider the divorce, reinstate the employees, and let bygones be bygones for the sake of the family. I almost admired the audacity of it, the way she pivoted from threats to false tenderness in under 30 seconds. I told her there was no version of reconsideration available to her, that the divorce was final, the terminations were final, and that if she or Desmond or Preston or any of the 25 others wanted to contest the loss of their positions, they were welcome to do so in court, where the forensic accounting report would become a matter of public record. That was the moment she stopped yelling and started threatening lawsuits instead, promising she had connections, promising this wasn't over. I simply closed the door. The following weeks were harder than I expected, not because I doubted my decision, but because untangling 6 years of embedded corruption meant rebuilding entire departments almost from scratch. My father brought in a steady, sharp-eyed operations manager named Thaddeus Cray to oversee procurement and logistics while we vetted new hires, and within a month, shipment delays that had plagued us for years simply vanished. Vendor costs, once mysteriously inflated, dropped by nearly 18% almost overnight once the shell company contracts were terminated and replaced with legitimate, competitively bid agreements. My father called me every evening that first month, sometimes just to read me updated numbers, his voice lighter each time, like a man slowly realizing a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there had finally been lifted. Reginald called exactly once, 3 weeks after the confrontation with his mother, his voice quiet in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. He didn't defend Delphine. He didn't defend the 27 names on that list. He simply asked how I was doing, and for a moment, the version of him I had married peeked through the version his mother had spent a decade constructing. I told him I was doing better than I had in years, and I meant it. He didn't call again after that. The lawsuit Delphine promised never materialized. Her lawyer, once he reviewed the forensic report my legal team shared as part of discovery, quietly advised her that pursuing litigation would only invite criminal referral for fraud, and the threats stopped as suddenly as they'd started. Desmond and Preston left the state within 2 months, and the shell logistics company Delphine had used to bill us for a non-existent warehouse was dissolved before the year's end, presumably to bury the paper trail before anyone came looking too closely. My father never pressed criminal charges, not because he lacked the evidence, but because he told me plainly that watching them lose everything they'd built on stolen ground was punishment enough for him, and that pursuing anything further would only drag our family name through years of ugly headlines. I understood that, even if part of me wanted more. 6 months later, Callaway Steel Fabrication posted its strongest quarterly earnings in company history, entirely staffed by people who had earned their positions on merit rather than bloodline. My father formally named me president that spring, standing in front of the same warehouse floor where he'd started the company nearly 40 years earlier, telling every employee gathered that the company had finally been returned to the people who actually built it. I stood there in my gray blazer, the same one from the courthouse steps, and for the first time in years, I felt like the company and my life truly belonged to me again.